I used to believe that if I stayed quiet long enough, someone would finally hear me. That maybe, just maybe, the silence would be louder than the words no one ever said to me. But the truth is, silence in this house is just another way to disappear. And I've been disappearing since the day I was born. Tonight, we had stew. The same thin, watery kind that Dad reheats for days until it clings to the bottom of the pot like burnt regret. I served it like I always do. My hands know the rhythm bowl spoon, pass it along. No eye contact, no thank you. Just the clinking of dishes and the low hum of the TV in the background, as if pretending we were a normal family. My brother Cole didn't wait for me to sit. He never does. He ate like the world owed him everything, and I was the debt collector. Dad barely touched his food. He just stared at his plate like he was willing it to disappear, or maybe hoping I would. "Don't hover," he muttered without looking up. "You're always hovering, like a damn ghost," Cole snorted. Fitting, don't you think? I swallowed hard, even though my mouth was dry. I went back to the sink, not because there were dishes, but because it was safer to face the wall. My eyes landed on the cracked plate above the window. It used to be white. Now it's the color of old paper brittle around the edges. Underneath, barely visible, unless you tilt your head just right, is my name, Anna. Mom had it made the week before I was born. That plate is the only thing in this house with my name on it. Everything else, the pictures on the wall, the sweaters in the laundry, the old family albums tucked in the hall closet, they belong to a life I was never truly a part of. A life that ended the day she died. And I began. You took everything Cole said once drunk and slurring into the porch night, and you didn't even say sorry. I was 12 when he said it. I still remember the sharp cold of the floor under my feet as I stood behind the screen door, holding my breath so he wouldn't know I was there. The words weren't new, but that night they sank deeper than usual, like they found a crack inside me I didn't know was there and made it wider. Sometimes I wonder if I was born broken, or if this house just chipped away at me until all that was left was someone easy to ignore. But I stayed. I cooked. I cleaned. I kept quiet. Not because I didn't want to scream, but because I learned that in this house, screaming only makes them look at you, and that's somehow worse. I've never asked for much, just a place at the table, a name spoken without bitterness, maybe even a smile once in a while. But tonight, as I scraped half-eaten stew into the trash and listened to the sound of Cole's boots stomping up the stairs, I realized something that stung more than all the insults combined. I don't even know what it feels like to be missed. I think I was 9 the first time it really landed the knowing. It wasn't just that they didn't love me. It was the look in my father's eyes when he thought I wasn't watching. That hollow, heavy stare, like I was something he had to carry, but never asked for. A permanent scar, shaped like a daughter. It was late summer, the kind where the Texas heat made the floorboards sweat and the air turned syrup thick. I'd gotten a nosebleed again. I used to get them a lot back then. Too much heat, too little food, too many nights curled up on the floor in front of the fan. I ran to the bathroom, pressed a towel under my nose like Mama used to show me in the mirror, except she wasn't there anymore, and no one had said her name in years. "Stop bleeding all over the damn place!" Dad barked from the kitchen. His voice cracked like a whip, even though I hadn't made a sound. I peeked out. He wasn't looking at me. Just sitting in his chair with a beer bottle dangling from his fingers, eyes locked on the cracked plate above the sink. My name. My mother's last gift. The only piece of me she ever got to hold. He didn't blink when he said it. Just muttered into the half-light, "She died for that." I stopped breathing. The towel slipped from my fingers and hit the tile with a soft plop. Blood still smeared on the edge. I didn't cry. Not then. I just stood still, like if I didn't move, maybe the words would float away. But they didn't. They hung in the air like the smell of burnt onions, sour, stubborn, impossible to ignore. That was the first time I realized I wasn't just unwanted. I was resented. From then on, I memorized how to walk without making noise, how to tuck myself so small into corners that even the dust forgot me. I learned that silence was safer than truth, and empty bellies were better than empty stares. Cole was worse, always watching me like I was a fly in his soup. He was 4 years older, big enough to hit, but careful never to leave a mark. He didn't need to, really. His words were sharper than fists. "You ruined her," he said once, flicking cigarette ash into my cereal. "She died because of you. You broke Dad. You broke everything." I wanted to scream then, to say I didn't ask to be born, that I didn't kill her, that I missed her too more than they ever would. But I didn't. I just stared at the soggy flakes and I ate them, ash and all, because in this house, hunger was normal. Swallowing pain was just another kind of meal. When people ask about my family, which doesn't happen often, I lie. Not because I want to, but because the truth always turns conversations into silence. And I've had enough of that. I say I was raised in a small town in Texas like it's a country song. I mention dusty summers and long porches. I joke that my dad's a strong, silent type, and my brother keeps me on my toes. I smile, and people nod like they understand. But they don't. They don't know that our house was the kind people drove past without looking, that the porch was never for lemonade, only for yelling. That silence in our home didn't mean peace. It meant someone was trying not to break. My father, John, people used to say he was kind once. Gentle with my mother, a hard worker, built half the homes in town with his own hands. But after she died, he became something else. Someone else. A man with eyes that looked straight through me, and fists that only curled when he drank too much, which was often. He never hit me. Not really. Just threw things. Words, mostly. Sometimes plates. Once when I was 10, he hurled a beer bottle across the room. It missed me by inches and shattered against the wall. He stared at the mess, then at me. "Clean it up," he said. "And try not to cut yourself, though I wouldn't cry if you did." Cole, on the other hand, was never kind. He was born angry, born loud. When Mom died, he became the man of the house overnight, and he hated me for it. He hated that Dad stopped going to work, that the fridge was always empty, and that every time he looked at me, he saw what was missing. He told his friends I was adopted. He made fun of the way I looked thinner, paler, darker-haired than them. He said I wasn't like them, that I didn't belong, and part of me started to believe him. No one in that house ever said I love you. No one tucked me in, or packed my lunch, or asked how school was. I raised myself. I stitched my heart together with old songs on the radio and borrowed books from school stories about people who were wanted, even if they were fictional. Sometimes, when I lay awake listening to Dad snore and Cole curse in his sleep, I'd whisper her name into the dark. Mama, just to hear it, just to feel it in my mouth. She was the only person who might have wanted me. But she left, or rather, I arrived and she left. And for that, no one ever forgave me. I tried to run once. I was 13, my backpack stuffed with 2 peanut butter sandwiches, a flashlight, and the $3 bill Cole gave me as a joke one Christmas. "Since you're worth nothing real," he'd said with a grin. I kept it, not because I liked the joke, but because it was something mine. I got as far as the bus stop before the sun came up. I remember sitting on the curb, legs curled under me, watching as the sky turned that soft pink you only get in the early hours. My stomach growled louder than I expected, and for a second, I thought maybe the world was trying to talk to me. Then I saw Dad's truck in the distance. I froze. Not from fear, but disappointment. I thought stupidly that maybe he'd come to get me because he cared. That maybe for once he'd say, "I'm sorry, Anna. Come home. It's okay." But when he stopped, he didn't get out. He just leaned out the window, looked at me with that same worn-out stare, and said, "If you're going to run, do it right next time. You're wasting both our mornings." He didn't even wait for me to get in, just turned the truck around and drove home. I walked, each step heavier than the last, not because my backpack was full, but because I had just learned something I couldn't unlearn. No one was coming for me. That night, I unpacked the sandwiches, put the flashlight back in the drawer, and tucked the fake bill into the crack behind my headboard. Then I went to the bathroom, washed my face, and stared at myself in the mirror for a long time. "You're not allowed to cry anymore?" I told the girl, staring back. She nodded. From that day on, I stopped fantasizing about being rescued. I stopped imagining secret letters from long-lost relatives or surprise visits from old friends of my mom's. I stopped believing there was a hidden life waiting for me, something beautiful just out of reach. Instead, I learned to survive. I swept the floors. I cooked every meal. I fixed the holes in Cole's jeans. I made coffee strong enough for Dad to stop mumbling. I kept my head down and my ears open. I became the ghost they trained me to be. And when I couldn't take it, when the silence grew teeth and started chewing on my insides, I'd sit under the table at night, back pressed to the wall, knees to chest, and stare up at the cracked plate on the shelf. Anna. One word, faded, fragile, barely there, but it was still mine. I think pain changes shape when no one acknowledges it. At first, it's sharp, a slap, a shouted door slammed hard enough to rattle your bones. But over time, it dulls. It turns into something quieter. Something that doesn't scream, but hums just beneath the skin like static. That's what my days became, static. I woke up, I moved, I served. I wasn't seen, not really. Not unless something needed cleaning, fixing, or absorbing an insult, a bad mood, a thrown cup. Cole dropped out of high school when I was 15. Started working odd jobs around town. Roofing. Yard work. Sometimes I'd hear people say, "He's doing his best," and I'd want to laugh. His best was slamming the door so hard the frames cracked when I forgot to buy milk. His best was telling people I was the help when they came over to watch football. His best was calling me a charity case loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I still made his coffee in the morning. Dad was quieter. Not kinder, just tired. He moved through the house like a shadow, talking only to the TV or the dog next door. He'd spend hours in the garage fixing things that didn't need fixing, pretending he couldn't hear when I asked him questions. One day, I found an old photo of him and my mom back when they were young, maybe 20. They were standing by the lake, both smiling like they had the world ahead of them. She had her hand on her belly, and I realized with a sting that she was pregnant with me. I stared at her face. She looked so full of light. I wondered what she would have said if she'd known how things would turn out. If she would have still smiled. If she would have still chosen me. I put the photo under my mattress. Not to hide it, but to keep it close. It became my anchor, the thing I touched on the nights I thought I might disappear completely. One morning, Cole came into the kitchen and found me humming. Just a soft tune I remembered from school, something cheerful. I didn't even realize I was doing it. He stared at me confused, like he'd caught a ghost, smiling. "You think this is a game?" he snapped. "You think you belong here acting like everything's fine?" I didn't answer. I just kept my hands moving, scrubbing the inside of a chipped mug. He grabbed the photo off the table I'd taken it out to look at while the coffee brewed and held it up. "You think she'd want you? After what you did to her?" I reached for it gently. "Please, just give it back." He ripped it in half. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, hands shaking pieces of my mother's face, fluttering to the ground like dead leaves. Then I picked them up one by one, and I kept humming. The photos stayed in my drawer, taped together carefully, even though the rip down the middle never quite aligned her face again. That's how grief feels, I guess, like something you try to piece back together with shaking hands, knowing it'll never look the same. But I kept it anyway, because even broken things deserve to be held. That summer, the air in the house got heavier. Not with heat, though the sun scorched the roof every afternoon, but with something else. A kind of tension that made my chest feel tight, like the walls were pressing in. Cole had been fired again. Something about mouthing off to a foreman. Dad barely spoke anymore. The refrigerator was nearly empty most days, and I started skipping meals to make sure they had enough. Not that either of them noticed. One night, I was folding laundry in the living room when I heard them talking on the porch. They didn't know I was awake. "She's useless," Cole muttered. "Old enough to get a job? Why is she still here?" Dad grunted. "She cooks. So do microwaves. She cleans. We don't pay her. She's your sister. She's the reason Mom died." There was a long pause. I held my breath, waiting for Dad to finally say it to defend me, to tell him that was enough. But all he said was, "I know." I sat very still. My hands trembled, a half-folded shirt slipping to the floor. I don't know why that moment hurt more than all the others. Maybe because it confirmed what I'd always suspected. Even in his silence, Dad had chosen a side. And it wasn't mine. The next morning, I found the cracked plate had fallen off the wall. It must have happened during the night, maybe from the slamming of the screen door or the weight of the summer humidity. It was on the kitchen floor, shattered into 4 pieces. My name, once faint but visible, was now fractured down the middle, unreadable. I sank to my knees and gathered the pieces like glass bones. Each shard was sharp and familiar, like every broken part of me I'd hidden for years. I didn't cry, not at first. I just sat there on the tile with the remnants of the only thing that ever said you belong. Then slowly, quietly, the tears came. Not like rain, but like a leak in a ceiling. One drop, then another, then more than I could contain. It was the kind of crying you can't hide. The kind that's been waiting for too long, building behind the dam of your ribs. And for the first time, I let it come. Not because I was weak, but because I realized I'd been strong for too long. I didn't sleep that night. After I swept up the broken plate and placed the pieces in a small box under my bed, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling as the fan spun slow circles above me. It felt like the air itself had shifted, like something was gone now, not just the plate, but the last thread tying me to this house. For years, I'd told myself that if I stayed long enough, did enough, proved myself enough, they'd see me. They'd let me be a part of the family again, or maybe for the first time. But the truth was, I was chasing a ghost. And ghosts don't hug you back. The next morning, I woke before sunrise and stood in front of my closet for a long time. I had maybe 3 outfits that still fit right, but I wasn't packing much. Just the box with the plate pieces, the taped photo of my mother, a worn sweater she'd knitted for my brother when he was small, and the fake $3 bill Cole had once mocked me with. That bill, it didn't mean nothing anymore. It meant I had survived every word, every slap of silence, every meal where I was invisible. I didn't tell them I was leaving. There was nothing to say. No one would stop me. They might not even notice. Dad was asleep in his chair, mouth open slightly, the TV casting pale light across his face. Cole wasn't home out drinking or out of town. I didn't care. I walked past them like a breeze, like I'd always been. At the doorway, I paused. My hand brushed the frame, the wood smooth from years of use, and I looked back at the kitchen one last time. The sink was empty. The walls still stained with old grease and memory. The spot where the plate used to hang now looked naked. I wanted to feel something: anger, fear, sadness. But all I felt was light. Like when you take off a coat you didn't realize was soaked through. I stepped outside. The air smelled like dust and dry grass, like freedom and loneliness all at once. I didn't have a plan, just a direction. I started walking, past the rusted fence, past the cotton fields, past the mailbox that still bore my mother's name scratched faintly beneath his. Elaine Hart, 1977, and I didn't look back. Because there was nothing behind me worth turning around for. I didn't go far, not at first. There's a bus stop near the edge of town where the asphalt turns to gravel, and everything smells like sunburnt hay. I waited there with a backpack at my feet and a silence in my chest that felt less like absence and more like peace. No one asked me where I was headed. Small towns don't need to ask. They just watch. The first place I stayed was a shelter 2 towns over, run by a woman named Carla, who had eyes like wind-blown glass and called everyone baby like it was a blessing. She didn't ask too many questions, just gave me a cot, a toothbrush, and a chore chart. I told her I was 21 even though I was barely 17. She nodded. "You're safe now, baby." I didn't know what to do with that word, safe. At night, I'd lie under the thin blanket and touch the box hidden in my bag. The broken plate, the photo, the fake bill. My proof that I had once existed somewhere, even if it wasn't in a place that wanted me. I got a job cleaning offices. Quiet work, the kind I was used to. No one looked too hard at me, and I liked it that way. Some nights, when the sky turned lavender and the windows rattled in their frames, I'd take out the photo, the one of Mom at the lake, and smooth the creases, trying to make her whole again. "I'm okay," I'd whisper. I don't know who I was trying to convince, her or me. The pain didn't leave. It softened. Became something else. Not bitterness. Just space. And slowly in that space, something new began. I started reading again. Not just to escape, but to remember who I was before I became invisible. I found a used bookstore that let me sit for hours without buying anything. I'd trace the spines with my fingers like they were old friends. Sometimes I'd cry just from the kindness of being allowed to exist quietly. One afternoon, I found a cracked dinner plate in a thrift shop bin. Not the same design, just plain white, but I bought it anyway. At home, I wrote my name underneath in pencil. Anna. It wasn't elegant and it would fade, but it was mine. And this time, no one could break it but me. It's been a few years now. I live in a small apartment above a florist's shop. The windows face west, so every evening the light spills in like honey across the floorboards, warming up even the coldest parts of me. I still don't have much: a second-hand couch, a chipped kettle, a bed with a frame I built myself. But everything in here is mine. Every crack, every whisper of color, every choice. Sometimes I still dream about the house, not the people, just the walls. The sound of the floor creaking under my feet. The scent of burnt coffee. The plate above the sink. But when I wake, it fades like fog in sunlight, and I remember I am not there anymore. I am not hers, the ghost of a woman I never met, the placeholder for her death. I am not his, the scapegoat for a broken man who forgot how to love. I am not his, the punching bag for a brother who never learned where pain ends and cruelty begins. I am only me, Anna. Some nights I still write in the margins of library books before returning them. Just small things. Not enough to ruin the page, just enough to remind the next person they're not alone. You are not your suffering. I hope someone loves you in a way that doesn't hurt. You matter, even if no one said it today. I guess that's my way of leaving little pieces of myself behind, but not the broken ones, the parts that survived. One evening, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a folded piece of lined paper smudged in places. I recognized the handwriting immediately. I found your plate. The real one. I glued it back together. It's not perfect, but neither are we. It was signed, Cole. There was a photo attached to the plate resting on the windowsill of what looked like Dad's old bedroom. My name was still visible, cracked but whole. I didn't cry. I just stood there, the letter in one hand and something strange in my chest. Not forgiveness, not exactly, but a loosening, a quiet release. I placed the letter beside the one I'd written to my mother years ago, the one I'd never mailed. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself breathe deep. The past didn't vanish, but it no longer defined me. I made tea. I opened the window, and I sat in the light. Finally, I was home.